Why is it that when people talk about childhood, they say, "We grew up online, and you remember something different. Phones had cords. Photos had to be developed. If you missed a show, you really missed it." Why is it that when younger generations talk about anxiety, you understand what it means to feel overwhelmed by constant information, yet you also know what it felt like to be completely unreachable? The kind of loneliness that came from silence, not from noise. And why is it that when you talk about technology with those older than you don't resist change, but you don't trust the digital world blindly either? You often feel too young for certain conversations, too old for others. If that in-between feeling is familiar to you, then today isn't about labels. And it's not about trendy generational jokes. We're talking about something deeper, a very specific psychological experience. What happens when your brain is still forming and the entire world suddenly switches operating systems? And how growing up across two eras quietly shapes the way you understand safety, connection, change, and your own identity. If you were born during that transition, most of your childhood happened in an almost entirely analog world. Boredom was real boredom. You had to sit through it. If you went to a friend's house, you didn't text first. If you made plans, you showed up on time and hoped they did too. If you missed a call, you often just missed it. Embarrassing moments, awkward phases, teenage disasters, they faded with time. They weren't archived forever. And then, just as you were approaching adulthood, the world accelerated. Instant messaging changed conversation speed. Social media changed what it meant to be seen. Mobile phones made constant availability the norm. You weren't eased into it. Within a few years, you had to learn an entirely new social language. Psychologically, this kind of environmental rupture creates a double reference point. Part of you understands slow rhythms, delayed responses, and relationships that breathe. Another part of you adapts to instant replies, notifications, and endless streams of information. You can have a long, focused conversation without checking your phone, and you're not intimidated by new platforms. That's a strength. But it also creates tension, because you remember what life felt like when being unreachable was normal. So sometimes you don't feel fully rooted in the past, and you don't feel fully immersed in the present either. That isn't confusion. It's what it feels like to grow up across a fault line in history. Here's what makes this generation psychologically distinctive. When the technological shift happened, your brain wasn't fully mature yet. Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, adaptability, and self-regulation, usually continues developing into the mid-20s. Which means when the internet, smartphones, and social platforms reshaped daily life, your nervous system was still learning how the world worked. You weren't adapting as a finished adult. You were still becoming yourself while absorbing two entirely different realities. You learned face-to-face communication before digital immediacy. You experienced delayed responses before instant messaging. That dual exposure often becomes an invisible advantage later. You can understand older generations' caution around technology, and you can collaborate naturally inside digital environments. But advantages rarely come without trade-offs. Constant connectivity makes true psychological downtime harder. Information never stops updating. Responses are expected faster. Boundaries grow thinner. Psychologists sometimes describe this as sustained activation, a nervous system that stays alert longer because the environment rarely pauses. People who develop under these conditions often become flexible, but they also fatigue more easily. So if you sometimes feel highly adaptable, yet subtly tense, that may not be personality. It may simply reflect growing up while the rules of reality were being rewritten. For many in this cohort, early adulthood coincided with the 2008 financial crisis. Just as you were preparing to build independence, careers, savings, long-term plans, the ground shifted, hiring slowed, opportunities narrowed, security suddenly looked fragile. This timing matters psychologically. Research shows that economic instability during identity-forming years can leave lasting imprints, not always visible but influential, because early adulthood is when people form beliefs about what work means, how safe the future feels, how much risk is acceptable. If stability collapses right when you're constructing it, the brain learns something quickly. Security isn't guaranteed, and that lesson tends to linger. You might save earlier, prioritize benefits over excitement, choose reliability over high-variance opportunities, not because you lack ambitions, but because uncertainty no longer feels theoretical, it feels remembered. Studies on financial stress suggest that even after recovery, people who experienced early instability often remain more risk-sensitive. Part of you adapts quickly. Another part quietly asks, what if everything shifts again? That isn't excessive worry, it's a nervous system trained by experience to respect volatility. And it helps explain why your generation often balances adaptability with caution, progress with preparedness. If you were born in that narrow window, you may often feel slightly out of place, not dramatically, just subtly. When you're with younger colleagues, you know every platform they use. You can navigate updates, apps, remote tools, but you don't feel entirely at ease being constantly reachable. You can respond quickly, yet you still remember what it felt like to disappear for hours without anyone expecting an explanation. And when you're with older generations, you're not resistant to change. You're comfortable with digital payments, hybrid work, multiple streams of communication, rapid information cycles. So where exactly do you belong? This in-between position shapes something psychologically interesting. When a person grows up during a structural shift, the brain often becomes better at holding contradictions. You can value independence without rejecting collaboration. You can question technology without fearing it. You can appreciate convenience while still noticing its cost. Fragmented attention, reduced privacy, rarer solitude. You are not entirely nostalgic, but you're not entirely unquestioning either. And that tension is not confusion, it's integration. You've seen before and after, so you understand that every gain carries a trade-off. And perhaps that's why you tend to evaluate change more carefully without panicking. In a world that keeps accelerating, this capacity to live between eras isn't a flaw, it's a form of psychological range. If any of this resonates, perhaps something shifts quietly inside you. You were never lost between generations. You simply experienced a structural transformation earlier than most. You remember a world without permanent connectivity, and you live comfortably inside one that never turns off. You've known waiting, silence, missed calls, unrecorded mistakes, and you've also adapted to constant updates, instant feedback, and perpetual visibility. That can feel contradictory, but contradiction is not weakness. Research on long-term resilience suggests that what predicts adaptability isn't age or intelligence alone. It's whether someone has successfully navigated major change before. You have. You've already crossed a cultural reboot. So when new technologies emerge, when norms shift again, when uncertainty rises, You may feel tension, but you don't collapse, because somewhere inside you already know the world evolves, tools change, systems reset. The essential question isn't how to freeze time, it's how to remain coherent while everything moves. Perhaps that is the quiet trait of this micro-generation. You adapt without entirely dissolving. You move forward without forgetting where you started. And in an era that keeps restarting itself, that ability may be one of your greatest strengths. This is happy psychology. May you understand yourself with more clarity and meet change without losing who you are. See you next time.